I have a very special love of Norway.
I'm Tom Kerss. I'm an astronomer.
Why Norway? It offers something truly extraordinary. The Northern Lights is a part of Norway's heritage and also a part of its unique beauty.
So Tom, we know you have a deep love for Norway and obviously particularly Norway and Northern Lights season. So can you tell me a bit about where that sort of love came from?
Yes, well, I have a very special love of Norway, and I think a big part of that for me is that I have seen the Northern Lights in many of the places that people elect to go. So you can imagine that the Arctic Circle encompasses lots of different land masses, and there are millions of people living within the Arctic. So there are opportunities to go and see the Northern Lights in different parts of Scandinavia. You can go and see them in North America. You could even, if you wanted to go quite extreme, go to somewhere like Siberia to see the lights. But why Norway among all of these places? Why this kind of spit of coastline? And the answer is because Norway is the most beautiful coastline in the world. So it offers something truly extraordinary that these other places do not. So I like to think of it as a combination of three factors. You have the sea, which is extraordinary. It's the Norwegian Sea. It's absolutely stunning. You have the sky, which of course is what we're there for. And then in between the two, you have what I would call the skjønnheten. That's the beauty in Norwegian. And when I talk about the beauty, I'm talking about the beauty of Norway itself. It's unique and it binds the sea and the sky together. I think of the Norwegian coast as a place where the sea and the sky meet. And in the middle is this astonishingly beautiful landscape that frames everything perfectly. You can't help but feel, when you're sailing along the coastline of Norway, watching the lights play overhead, that it's a timeless experience, that you're stepping into the past, that you're experiencing a kind of ageless beauty that has always been there in some fashion. And then you realize, and particularly when you speak to local Norwegians, that it has been a part of their culture. Norway has a very special connection to the Northern Lights. Not many people know this, but it was actually Norwegians that named the Northern Lights. We tend to think of the term Aurora borealis as a kind of old-fashioned word. But Aurora borealis is relatively recent. It was coined by Galileo back in the early 17th century. The word Northern Lights is derived from an Old Norse term, nordoljos, which is quite similar to the modern Norwegian term nordlys. Nordoljos was first coined all the way back in the 13th century by Norwegian travelers that went to what we now call Greenland and experienced the lights in those skies. And so it's actually a Norwegian term. In more recent history, Norwegians studied the lights like almost no others, and so many scientific breakthroughs about the space weather environment, how auroras form, the Earth's geomagnetic conditions. So much of that research was done by Norwegians in Norway. So if you're an Aurora chaser, Norway is hallowed ground. You step foot on Norway and you're standing where some of these great pioneers actually came to understand this phenomenon. And then of course, I would say the final beautiful thing about Norway that makes it stand out is that the coastline itself is such a fantastic place to chase lights because the weather can be very changeable. It's warm in places, warmer than you might expect, and certainly warmer than the interior parts of the peninsula, like northern Finland. But when you're on the coast of Norway and you are sailing, for example, through Lofoten, the archipelago of islands that stretches out off the coast, the mountains and the fjords break up the clouds. So as you're sailing there, it might seem cloudy on the forecast, but suddenly a huge gap appears, and you can see the mountain that's forming it over to your left or your right. And it's like a gift, an opportunity. So there's just something uniquely exciting and changeable about the conditions around Norway that is kind of a match for the exciting and changeable conditions of the Northern Lights themselves. And it all just comes together in a way that, in my experience, having traveled to so many places, is completely unique and very addictive. You also have the Gulf Stream connecting to Tromsø, and as a result, the sea around Tromsø does not freeze. And when you're in Lofoten, in particular, you have such an interesting mountainous archipelago of islands that are jutting out into the sea that it causes a lot of currents that break up cloud. It's rather like the orographic effects that can form clouds on very tall mountains can have the opposite effect and break up cloud, producing these very reliably clear areas. So when we're sailing into the Arctic and then we cross over to Lofoten, it starts to get really exciting because not only are we at the right latitude for the lights to appear, but we're also moving into an area where that weather is so changeable. It's also warmer than you might expect. It is Arctic cold, it's often below freezing in temperature terms, but it's not nearly as cold as it would be if you were further inland where it can get shockingly cold.
Now, one of the most important things I've heard about increasing your chances of seeing the lights is spending more time above the Arctic Circle. So can you explain a little bit of that for us?
The Arctic Circle sort of defines a region of the far north, and the exact latitude of the Arctic isn't connected precisely to the northern lights, but the lights occur in an oval which surrounds the Earth's geomagnetic pole. And the geomagnetic pole is not that far away in global terms from the true North Pole itself. So on any given night, the oval will be somewhere typically in what we call the high Arctic, which is up over the Arctic Sea. And when the oval becomes more active and it expands and comes further south, it comes to cover more of the Arctic. But it's only in very extraordinary circumstances where the oval actually goes further south than the Arctic. So when you're in the Arctic, no matter the conditions, whether the lights are active or not, they're just a part of the nightlife. And as long as it's a clear night in the Arctic, it doesn't matter if the lights are very quiet, you will see the auroral oval. It's ever present. So being in the Arctic and maximizing your time in the Arctic just gives you more opportunities to see auroras regardless what the conditions are like. We all want it to be amazing, but if the aurora is going to be quiet, you will still get good views when you're in the Arctic.
Can you share a little bit about what you know about the relationship of the Northern Lights in connection with the communities that live in the Arctic?
Everywhere I go in Norway, I ask people about their own personal connection to the lights, and I get such a range of answers. In the far north, the lights are so frequently visible that people see them simply as a part of the natural world. But they typically tell me that they see it as a very comforting part of the world, because even as the landscape changes around them and even as their own communities change around them, the lights have been ever present over their lives, over, for some cases, decades since their childhood. In the south, there are more metropolitan areas where the lights are not so frequently seen. And when I speak to people there, they actually share the same sorts of feelings that our guests tend to share, which is that they actually desire to go north themselves. And of course, Hurtigruten is a local, lifeline to the north of Norway, and so many Norwegians do take the Hurtigruten ships from the south of Norway up to the north and make their own kind of Arctic voyages to do that. So you get a range of opinions, but I think it is generally felt that the Northern Lights is a part of Norway's heritage and also a part of its unique beauty. And Norwegians know that it's one of the key things that draws people to Norway. So they love to share it, they love to talk about it, they love to share their own personal stories as well.
Thank you for your time, Tom, and thank you for watching wherever you are in the world. If you want to learn a little bit more about the Northern Lights or planning your own Aurora adventure, check out our playlist here or all of the resources that are linked in the description.